I used to think perception was simple. Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Those were the senses everyone talked about in school. And the more I learned about autism and about how people experience the world, the more I realized that this picture is far too small, because in reality there are 8 senses, and they quietly shape how every moment feels. So let's take a closer look at that. At first it sounds strange, like 8 senses, but once you start looking at them, it makes perfect sense. I assure you, we all know the classic 5. The visual sense, the auditory sense, the sense of smell, the sense of taste, and the sense of touch. Those are the obvious ones. They are easy to imagine and easy to describe. But here's the thing. But then there are 3 more. Proprioception, the vestibular sense, and the interoception. Proprioception tells you where your body is without needing to look. The vestibular sense gives you the balance and orientation and the feeling of moving, turning, and stopping. And the interoception is everything that happens inside the body, like heartbeat, hunger, thirst, tension, and temperature. And that's where it gets interesting. What's fascinating is that these senses all work together, and the way the brain filters them creates the reality we each live in. We often assume that everyone perceives the world roughly through the same way, but when you start looking closely, it becomes obvious that people experience the very same situation in completely different ways. Not only neurodiverse people or neurodivergent people, but everybody. Think of 3 people sitting in a swimming pool. The water is exactly the same temperature for everyone, but one person says it's cold, the other says it's so warm, and one says it's perfect. And none of them are wrong. Their bodies simply interpret it differently. Funny enough, that actually explains a lot, because that's what perception is. Not a perfect reflection of the world, but the brain's interpretation of it. This becomes even clearer when we look, for example, at animals. A dog, for example, hears frequencies we'll never hear. Those sounds literally don't exist for us, but they shape the dog's entire reality. We live in the same physical space and yet experience completely different worlds. And we wouldn't say these sounds don't exist. We know that we can't hear them, right? Humans aren't that different from each other. It's just less extreme. Some people perceive, for example, light intensely. Others barely notice faint sounds, and the differences go far beyond the 5 senses we usually talk about. And once you see it, you just can't unsee it. For autistic people and neurodivergent people, these variations can be stronger or more noticeable, especially in how the brain filters sensory information. But the underlying principle is universal. Perception builds reality, and the way those 8 senses work determines how calm, how stressed, how focused, or overwhelmed someone feels. And one thing that surprised me is how fluid perception is. It's not fixed. The same light that feels soft in the evening can feel harsh the next morning, or a sound that's fine one day can feel too loud on another. And the balance between these senses change consistently constantly, depending on energy, stress, environment, and even the time of the day. And if you think about it, this shifts everything. A powerful example of how different people can experience the world comes from a place in Germany known as the House of Silence. That's a home for people who are both deaf and blind. And watching them, how they communicate, is incredibly humbling. Their reality is almost entirely built from touch, vibration, and movement, and the same environment we move through visually and verbally becomes a completely different universe for them. It's a reminder that perception defines experience, that perception defines experience far more than the environment itself. And even among people who are considered typical, the difference is huge. Some are exceptional at night vision, others can't see well in dim light, and some instantly notice small details in a room while others overlook them entirely. Some sense hunger or discomfort immediately, others register these signals later. And these variations don't make anyone more or less normal, they are simply differences in how the 8 senses filter life. And you know what? That actually puts a lot into perspective. What I found most interesting is how these sensory settings sit on the spectrum. Everyone is somewhere on it, but some people crave movement and change, others prefer calm and stillness. Some filter sensory input strongly, others need it more and need time to organize it. And none of this is right or wrong, it's just how the nervous system is tuned. Understanding these 8 senses change the way I look at people and at myself. It explains why some environments feel comfortable to one person and overwhelming to another, why someone might avoid certain lights, sounds, or fabrics while someone else seeks them out, and why communication sometimes requires not just listening to words, but understanding the sensory world behind them. And honestly, once you look at it this way, a lot of behavior on the neurodiverse spectrum suddenly makes a lot of sense. For me, the most liberating part of learning about the 8 senses is realizing that we're all living in slightly different versions of the same world. Not because anyone is wrong, but because our brains highlight different things. And once you see that, it becomes much easier to understand others and to understand why the same moment can feel completely different from one person to the next.